Well, good morning. During COVID, I had to come up here and I would be up here by ourselves, and you had to pretend like you're talking to a lot of different people. But for those of you that were able to come out, we're certainly thankful that you're here and safe and sound. And obviously, many are at home. I know some were trying to get out, and obviously the roads are pretty rough. So thankfully you're safe and at home. So, but we're going to study a little bit of Mark, the 5th chapter, and we'll see how far we get. And just kind of talking again about our Savior and what he was willing and able to do for us, and the example that he's left for us. There's a number of people we need to continue to remember in our prayer. I'm only going to announce a few. More will be said later. Remember Donald King, Libby's McReynolds' husband. He had a setback a couple of days ago. They had to put him back on the respirator, and tomorrow they're going to put a trach in. So please remember him, and hopefully he'll be able to continue to progress and get past this little setback that he is having. Remember Marie Center's sister as well. She's in the ICU, still not doing well at all. My dad's aunt, Peggy, passed away. So please remember our family in your prayers if you would. And then Gene Dodd, Karina and Melissa's dad is back in the hospital with, they think, is his heart. So please remember him as well. Is there anybody else anyone like to bring up? Like I said, there's going to be more at the announcements. But Mike?
Stephanie Soul Wells, she's at nursing home in Lebanon. I wasn't here last Sunday. I was down in Hillsboro, but she has 2 screws, broke her hip. She's been in therapy for quite a while. She doesn't look very well at all.
Okay. Definitely need to continue to remember Dorothy Wells and David. As you may know, or you certainly will now, she broke her hip, and so she's in recovery or getting therapy over at Otterbein, so please remember her. So if you would, please bow with me and go to God in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this another Lord's Day that we have to come and to worship you. We thank you, dear Father, for your grace and your mercy, your love that you have bestowed upon us, the opportunity that we have to be your children. We thank you, dear Father, for your word and the simplicity of it, that we can apply it to our lives and be examples to others and continue to share the good news. We ask, dear Father, that you would be with those that are mentioned that were sick, those that are grieving over the loss of loved ones. We ask that you would be with all of them, that you'll heal those that are in hospitals and continue to bring comfort to all of the families. We ask, dear Father, that you be with those that are still traveling to get here, and we ask that you will keep them safe. That you'll be with all of us, dear Father, as we strive to worship you this morning, that we will put all the cares of the world out of our minds and focus solely on you. We thank you, dear Father, for your willingness to send your Son to die for us, and we thank you so much for his example, and it's through his name we pray. Amen. All right, Mark the 5th chapter. We left off talking about the description of this man, and we kind of I got sidetracked into pigs conversation, but we were talking about this man, and really nobody could do anything for him. You know, they had tried to bind him. Nothing was able to, the shackles, the chains, nothing was working. And so they just let him go, basically, in the tombs, and that's where he was. And Jesus comes along, and as we had talked about, or this is what we'll pick up, the unclean spirit notices Jesus. And we talked about this a little bit at the end of last class. But as soon as he sees Jesus, it talks about that he rushes over in verse 6. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him. And he shouts, it says, with a loud voice, "What business do you have with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." It is an amazing thing, as we've talked about many a times, the reaction of demons or the unclean spirits to Jesus in particular, as we see here. This man man could do nothing for him. Other humans were not able to do anything for him. But as soon as he saw Jesus, he falls down before him, scared to death. "Do not torment me." Other places we'll talk about, "Do not throw me into the abyss." Their understanding of what Jesus was able to do, what God was able to do, is pretty awesome. The sad part is the humans miss it many times. But certainly, we get a little bit of a glimpse into the spiritual side of things from the standpoint of God and Satan, the demons, and all that went on, and their perspective of Jesus. Now, here, what I think is powerful is that they beg. They beg him. And where do they want him to go, as I said a couple minutes ago? They beg him to do what? Go to the pigs. And so Jesus, I can't remember who I was talking to afterwards, was talking about that in verse 13. Jesus actually gives them permission. Gives them permission to go. Jesus had that power, go. And he allows them to go. Again, just showing further, illustrating his power that he has overall, and obviously here in context of these demons, as verse 12 is talking about. Now, all of this is going on, and you can imagine the herdsmen, right? The herdsmen are standing there. They're watching this amazing situation that occurs, and they go and tell everybody in the city. And whether it's the fact that they lost the pigs, whether it's the fact that they see this man all of a sudden now, in verse 15, and they saw, and then they came to Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down, clothed and in his right mind. And the very man who had previously had the legion, and they became frightened. So not only do they lose the pigs, the herdsmen do, but the people see the one that they knew full well was the guy. That was the one that was yelling in the tombs. He was the one that they could not bind up anymore. They knew who he was. And now all of a sudden he's just sitting there normal. In his right mind, it says. Dressed in his right mind. And it scared them to death. You think about this from the people's perspective, and they have a choice to make. And what choice do they make? In verse 17. They beg him to leave. So Jesus, the one is able to do all these things, they beg him to leave. The reaction of humans. We might read this and say, why would you ever do that? There's a man here that had a demon. Now he's in his right mind. That this frightened them so much that they wanted Jesus out of their region. Now, it certainly could be because, or probably because of the fact that the pigs were killed. And this is the whole story of everything that's happening. Who is this? We would always hear that phrase in other places. Who is this man? We just talked about that at the end of Mark 4 with his own disciples. Who is this? And so you have this frightened people that are frightened because of what he has done and what the power that he has. And so they ask him to leave or beg him to leave. And now you come to this last one, and I think this is the neatest part of this story. So all of this is going on. They beg him to leave, and in verse 18, it says, and he was getting into the boat. The man who had been demon-possessed was begging him that he might accompany him. And he did not let him go, but he said to him, go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you, and now he had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis and what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. So now you have the man's reaction of this. I'm begging to go with you. I want to go with you. What did Jesus want him to do? What does Jesus want him to do? He could have gone with him, and they could have said, this is the guy that used to have a demon. But what significance was this going to have in the hometown, do you think? What do you all think?
Everyone knew who he was.
Yeah.
So for him to all of a sudden be normal again and to be proclaiming what Jesus had done, that's just spreading even more the gospel that Jesus was there to teach.
It is an amazing opportunity that we have just to tell your story sometimes. The power of your story. It was going to have a tremendous impact, so much so that it would seem to reason that the people that are begging Jesus to leave because they were so frightened of what happened, now in verse 20, it says the people in the area that he was talking to were amazed. He tells them what happened. They were amazed at it. Your story has significance in it. And sometimes we're just afraid to tell our story, our testimony, our witness, whatever word that people in the world would call it, and we get kind of afraid to use the term. It's the same thing. You tell your story. How Jesus has changed my life. We all do. Whether you grew up in families that are very faithful and then you've, for generations, like in my family, you can go back, you see people sat in Church of Christ buildings, all those things. It doesn't matter. For me, my story is my relationship with God, and it's the same for you. We have significance. We have stories to tell of what Jesus has done to me because we know people, and people know us. There are people that you're going to reach that nobody else is going to reach just because simply you know them, or they're more apt to listen to what you have to say, but sometimes we're just so afraid to tell them. What I love about this that is so powerful, this demon-possessed man didn't tell them anything other than what Jesus did. That was the power. I think so often we're 3 steps down the road and trying to tell everybody everything else. Just tell him what he's done for you. How you're able to get through your daily life and the things that you go through in this life because of him, because of your faith in him, your relationship with him, the things that he's done for us spiritually, obviously, from that standpoint is just so awesome. And sometimes, man, you just have a great story to tell, and we just don't think we're too ashamed to tell, or it's not good enough to tell. It's okay. Tell your story. People need to hear what Jesus is able to do for all of us if we're willing to tell it. Mark?
We have to also be strong in the word and faith because of the cost that it may happen. I mean, it was Jesus that cost the people that were taking care of the pigs quite a bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to be careful we're not like those guys that say, oh, you cost me too much, please leave.
Yeah. We were talking about this, I think it was the Isaiah class. It's amazing how often you'll get to where it's actually the financial issues that are the problem for people. You're taking away or you're destroying the way that I make money. You know, that's more important for a lot of people rather than understanding truth and what God is. And that's why I think Mark, the 4th chapter, before we get into all of this, is talking about the parable of the sower. You know, there are going to be people that are going to worry about everything else. There are people that are going to focus on everything else. You're looking for the good hearts. You're looking for people that need to hear the truth. Everyone does. And who knows that your story, years down the road, if the Lord wills to allow people to live, may be significant or have an impact on them down the road. It doesn't have to be that they automatically react to it. It's just important for us to just tell people what Jesus does and how, and we can read it and things that he's able to do in our lives is just so powerful. And you see that here. They were amazed. Certainly he had a unique situation with the demon possession, but I think that we can also show or have some significant impact on those that are around us. Robin?
Say kind of like you're talking about sharing the story and all. Everything was so alive to him because of what he had experienced. So that message of, and I'm sure everything that Jesus is saying just means so much to him because he's been so much on the other side. So when we're going through things, I think we forget that sometimes the power of we've been on the other side, but we see him and we speak that to people, then it's so much more alive to us because we've seen his goodness in the middle of lots of garbage.
Yeah.
So we have to remember that. Don't keep that to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had one note that I had from a long time ago was just that remembering he asked to be with Jesus. It's not just the 12 that were important. Everybody has a job. So it's not just the elders. It's not just the deacons. It's not just the preachers. Everybody has a job and has importance. But it just hit me. It was partly what she was saying is he had been so alone and he wanted so desperately to be with the one who saved him.
Yeah.
And how we should, we need to have that too.
That's the amazing thing with this when you think about what Jesus, it reminds me a lot in Acts where the Peter heals the man and he just clings to him. He's holding on to him. Actually, when Peter's giving a defense or talking, the guy's at his legs holding on to him. I couldn't preach that way probably if Matt was holding on my leg. But you just think about the significance of that. This is the one that saved me. This is how I got to where I am. Can you imagine if we viewed it that way from a spiritual standpoint? I know we like to use the term those that are spiritually sick, and that's good. It's spiritually dead. It's dead. You are separated from Jesus Christ. And sometimes, I know for me, we almost like lessen that point. When I am not having, if I'm not in a relationship with God, you are his enemy. His enemy. And so to understand the significance of what Jesus was willing to do for us and to give us that relationship with him starts with us looking and making sure we really understand who we really are, what we really did, and what he did for us. And that's what I think is so powerful of Ephesians, the first chapter, and going into chapter 2, when he says, you need to remember this used to be you. You were the one that was separate from him. You were the one with no hope. You were the one that was living not with him. But now you need to remember who you are. And you need to understand that there are other people that need to hear the same thing. They need Jesus Christ. And just like we do, and we need to make sure that we're telling our story. And that's hopefully what you get from these conversations as we go through this. There's significance to what Jesus does and why he does these miracles. It's just not, willy-nilly out of his hands. There's a reason, a purpose for the things that he does, and we're definitely going to see that here in the next chapter.
I find it interesting that just 2 chapters before he tells them, "Don't make me known all," and now he said, "Go ahead and tell everybody." I don't know if it's because of the audience who would have heard it or what, but it's interesting that quickly he's changed.
It's so interesting. In the next chapter, he says, "Don't tell anybody." Again, but there are times. Why would he tell this man who's across the river, across the sea of Galilee, "You need to go tell my story"?
Well, this was a Gentile region that he was in, and so there's a different audience.
Yep.
And it's not fighting the Jews that you have to control. Jesus needed to control the message. This is new to these people.
Yeah. So you had this amazing impact depending on where he is and where he's going to tell people to go and to tell and those different things. And there's different reasons why Jesus does what he does, certainly. I do think, as we talked about with the parables, there was a difference between them coming up to Jesus and him having to teach all these things. He would teach in parables, and he was going to deal with other things. But his disciples could go tell them what the parables meant, and they could go and talk about what they were. And so it's back to the responsibility. There was an importance for all these people that were following him, his disciples, and going out and being the lights that they're called to be. That's just not a let your light shine thing for us. That was then. They needed to let their light shine. And you certainly see that then, and it's something that we need to continue to do now. He comes back across, I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Just a couple things. Decapolis, where he was going, is an area with a bunch of cities in it, so the effect that he was going to have was going to be spread. And then I was thinking about your story. So when you tell your story, there may be somebody that's affected that'll go out and be on fire and spread the word so much more. It's just amazing what one story can do, the effect that it can have.
Yeah.
This, he was well known in the area of being somebody that could break chains. There's nobody that can control him. And what happened
Yeah.
to Jesus.
No, I totally agree with you. It's significant, if we're willing to tell the story, and that sometimes is the problem. This next chapter to me is just awesome. They all are, and I know I say that a lot, but this one, as far as chapters to go to that show that Jesus is willing to help anybody, this is the one that comes to mind for me. Jairus was a prominent man. He was who was he? Does it say? Yeah, he was a leader of the synagogue, and what he is able to do is, as he goes over, a synagogue official in verse 22, and he sees this one. He obviously had heard of him, and he runs up to him, and what does he do? Falls at his feet. There's some interesting similarities that occur in a lot of these stories. Falls at his feet. This is the synagogue official. In verse 22, he says he pleaded with him, begged him. And as a dad, as a parent, as anybody, when you're thinking about a child, you can kind of understand there was nothing that was going to stop this synagogue official from going and talking to this one. What I think is powerful about Jairus in many situations is he understands the situation and what this healer is able to do, what Jesus is able to do. Other synagogue officials, they argued with Jesus. They did all sorts of things. But when he sees him, he falls down at his feet. He pleads, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live." Can you imagine what that sounded like? My baby girl is dying. You're the only one that I know that can help her. Runs to him. Pleads to save his baby girl. It's important as we go through this that he calls her my little daughter, because Jesus is going to use that in a few minutes. My daughter. And the power that you see, or the emotion I hope that we see in this situation. Jairus and the issues that he is dealing with, maybe we can get a little glimpse in if you just think, or you just have any compassion whatsoever towards children. There are commercials that come on and talk about sick children. I have to turn it. It gets me choked up when I think about those things and what children have to go through, and people hear what people have gone through. I mean, it's powerful when you're thinking about it from a demon-possessed man, for sure, but you think about a child. Now we're dealing with his dad and his daughter, and he's so distraught, but he knows this one, you can heal her. Please come with me. And as we go through this, we find out some information. His daughter's 12. That number is going to come up here in just a second again. She's 12 years old, and so obviously it's a difficult situation for him. In verse 24, it says, and he went off with him, and a large crowd was following him and pressing in on him. So again, Jesus says, okay, let's go. I'm going to your house. Jairus, just this little bit of hope, this excitement. He's coming to my house. And you have this huge group of people that are following him. And they're all surrounding him, just wanting to touch him. And now we get a little insight into somebody else. This insignificant woman. This woman who had been dealing with this thing for a long, long time. And she's not insignificant because she's a woman. She's insignificant because of what she was not a prominent person in the synagogue, as Jairus would have been. Just somebody in the crowd. But in her mind, there was a thought that she had. She had been dealing with something for a long time. How long has she been dealing with this? 12 years. 12 years. I love that. 12 years ago, Jairus was holding his new baby girl. A rejoicing that occurred. 12 years ago, this lady had this horrible situation, infirmity that she dealt with. 12 years. You imagine as they get to this point now, they all look to the same one to be healed. He's the one that can do this. No matter the situation, he's the one that can do this. They dealt with it for 12 years in the situation of the woman. And now you have this all culminating in this one little story. Jesus begins to walk. And this woman, what does she think in her head? What does she say that she's able to do? Or what is she trying to do? Just want to touch him. What is interesting about this in verse 26, and had endured much in the hands of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was not helped at all, but instead she had become worse. Man could not help her. Same situation as the demon-possessed man. Man could do nothing. Matter of fact, they may have evidently made it worse. She was at least worse. They were not doing anything, and she lost all of her money trying to fix this. And so she says in her thinking in verse 27, I just got to go touch him. In verse 28, if I just touch his garment, I will get well. So you imagine her trying to get through the crowd to get up to where he is, the crowd that is there. Everybody's trying to see Jesus. And we're given this little glimpse into her thought process. In verse 29, and immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt her body, and she was healed of her disease. I don't know what that would have been like. Immediately, she touched him. And what she had dealt with for 12 years, spent all of her money on, agony, horrible situation for 12 years, was immediately gone, and she felt it. She knew it was gone. Verse 29, from the description standpoint, is just amazing. And this is another one of those times I just don't want us to read it and keep going and not think about what is happening to this woman. 12 years. Some of us have gone through chronic issues for a few years. 12 years is a long time. 1 year is a long time when you're going through struggles and difficulties. But immediately, the flow of blood stopped. And she knew it. Verse 30. And immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that power from him had gone out, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" So now you have a situation that's going on between these two. This is where Jairus and this woman kind of meet. The situations meet. So Jesus is walking. He feels the power leave him, which is awesome. And then he stops. What's Jairus wanting to do? Just get to my house. Just get to my house. All these other things are insignificant. Just get to my house. The woman doesn't touch Jesus because she wants him to stop and talk. She was just trying to be healed. We'll see that in just a second. But you just think about this. I'm trying to get Jesus to my house to heal my daughter before she dies. And he stops. And he has this conversation with this woman. There's a huge crowd that's around, and he says, "Who touched me?" And, you think about the disciples, like, a lot of people touched you, Jesus. A lot of people did. But verse 33, "But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth." And what does Jesus call her? You're my daughter. My little daughter. My daughter. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be cured of your disease. Daughter. The compassion of our Savior, no matter who the situation was and how he handles these things, are just so awesome. He certainly was going to take care of Jairus' daughter, quite frankly, whether she was alive or dead. That wasn't the point. Jairus had to have faith, as we're going to see in just a second. But you think about him stopping and talking to this woman, and at least in my mind in verse 34, just looking at her in the eyes. "Daughter, you're mine. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be cured of your disease." Verse 35, while he was still speaking, people came from the house of the synagogue official and said, "Your daughter has died. Why bother the teacher further?" It's interesting how this plays out here in verse 36. So Jairus has a choice to make. What does Jesus say? He just was told his daughter's dead. What does Jesus say to him? Don't be afraid. Just believe. Have faith. He has a choice. Am I going to do that? Or just don't bother. I'm not going to bother you anymore. He obviously chooses to have Jesus come to his house, to have faith in him. It tells us who he brought with him. And they go to his house. There's obviously the commotion and the people crying over what's going on. In verse 39, Jesus says, "Why are you making commotion and weeping? The child has not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing. And you know what? I would have laughed too. I'm here. I know she's dead. I know she's dead. See, but the difference between dead to humans and dead to Jesus are just two totally different things. To us, we look at it, or a lot of time we obviously view it from an end. It's an end of something. Jesus in 1 Thessalonians will say the same thing about God. They're asleep. They're just asleep. It's okay. So they start laughing as humans would. He puts them outside, takes the father and the mother in and the companions, and they enter the room. And he says, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And immediately, there's that word, the girl got up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old, and immediately they were completely astonished. The story, when you think about Jairus and his daughter, what now has Jesus done that they had not seen before? Resurrection. He brought somebody back from the dead. These chapters that we're going through are just so fascinating to me, what he's able to do. He's healed people. He teaches as one with authority. He's cast out demons. Now all of a sudden he's calmed the storm. So nature is listening to him. He has authority over. And now he's brought somebody back from the dead. Who is this? Who is this? Now, back to Matt's point, as he said before, he tells them to go and tell in verse 43, "And he gave them strict orders that no one was to know about this, and he told them to give her something to eat." Because when you die and come back, you're hungry, as you know. But you think about that from that standpoint as we go forward with this. Why would they not tell anybody? All the people were laughing at him. They would have known when she came out and she was healed, as she's going to do. And it's just a powerful, powerful chapter that we could spend many, many classes on. It's just a beautiful, beautiful chapter, and hopefully it has some impact on you. We'll try to get through at least some of chapter 6 on Wednesday. Thank you.